So with Samsung announcing their brand new S25 Edge, which is their ultra thin kind of S25 model of phone for their lineup, that all but confirms an iPhone 17 Air, because why would Samsung announce that without actually announcing when it's coming out, when the iPhone 17 Air has been rumored as Apple's ultra thin variation of their iPhone. But again, we know a lot about that 17 Air, but what about the 17 Pro and 17 Pro Max? That's still going to be Apple's most expensive and most premium product, so we do expect 7 changes coming from the 16 Pro to the 17 Pro lineup. Let's get right into it. So again, it might feel like we just got the 16 Pro and 16 Pro Max, but it's already been about 5 months since we've been using this thing, and we are in 2025, meaning that we are now in a new flagship year. So with the 17 Pro and 17 Pro Max, the first change we're going to see is to the front-facing camera, going from 12 megapixels over to 24 megapixels. Now this will allow for crisper images, of course, maybe some better AI front-facing detection for visual intelligence perhaps, if Apple brings it to that light. And we also should be getting this 24 megapixel front-facing camera for the entire 17 lineup. So it's not just going to be specific for the Pro and Pro Max model, it should come down to the 17 as well as the new 17 Air, which should replace the overall 17 Plus model. Now it remains yet to be seen if we're going to be getting things like 120 FPS or 240 slow-mo, or even something like an 8K video recording on the back or the front end of the camera, but at least rest assured that we're not going to get a 24 megapixel crisper shooter, which is about 2x the amount that we've had for years past with a 12 megapixel camera. And then of course Apple will reinvigorate their A19 chip, because we're going to go from the A18 Pro to the A19 Pro on the 17 Pro and 17 Pro Max, which again, Apple will call it their latest and greatest, their biggest and baddest, and it's going to be the best chip we've ever made, of course. But we should only see probably 15 to 20% increases in CPU and GPU performance overall, but the most important thing is going to be that this will allow for more RAM into these devices, with the 17 Pro and the 17 Pro Max going from 8 gigs of RAM to 12 gigs of RAM. We're learning with this new AI wave and this new Apple Intelligence wave that this requires a lot of RAM, especially if you're working on device. Even if you're working off device and you're sending this off to a server out on the cloud or some server farm with ChatGPT, it's still going to require a lot of RAM because it's constantly pinging back and forth, needing that additional RAM to make sure that it's running fluidly and also making sure that it's running without burning up your entire phone. But again, if you're doing things on device, which is going to be the next wave, I do believe that these manufacturers and these companies like Apple and Samsung and Google want all this AI processing, or as much of it, to rely on on-device hardware, because it'll make it faster, it'll make it easier, and it'll make it more secure overall. So I think that's going to be the epitome of Apple Intelligence, when everything can be run on device, or at least most of it. So the inclusion of 12 gigs of RAM for the Pro models, of course, are going to help from the AI front, and that's the main reason it's happening. But it'll have these secondary effects for other things like gaming, multitasking, and maybe even a true multitasking mode on the larger 17 Pro Max, which should remain at that 6.9-inch form factor. Let me know what you think 12 gigs of RAM would unlock for an Apple iPhone. Of course, the main focus will be on AI and making sure that it's running as smoothly and as cool as possible, but like I mentioned, it will have secondary effects, so let me know what you think those secondary effects will get the most benefit from. The next one should really help from a magic moments perspective. If you guys have seen a video about a month or two ago that I released, which is all about these aha and magic moments that you get from the Apple ecosystem, right? The more hardware that you get from Apple, the more of these magic moments you get, like being able to unlock your computer with your Apple Watch, or being able to copy and paste across hardware devices, or using something like your iPhone to control your Apple TV. All these things are just magic moments that, again, from a hardware and software perspective, Apple owns that entire vertical stack, making it much easier for these things to communicate with each other. So the next step is going to be Apple building their own 5G, Wi-Fi, and Bluetooth modems to be put into these phones. Now, as of right now, when it comes to the 5G modem, the only phone that's going to be new from the iPhone 17 lineup that's going to get the in-house 5G modem will be the iPhone 17 Air. But Apple will stick to the more advanced Qualcomm chips for their 17 Pro and 17 Pro Max, but we will be getting Apple's new Wi-Fi chip, the one that's built in-house. Now, I don't know exactly what this is going to mean from a feature standpoint and from a practicality standpoint, but I do think Apple's going to work its magic in terms of being able to use these devices to communicate with your other Apple ID or Apple ecosystem devices in-house. Because again, if Apple owns it, then Apple can then play around with it a little bit more and have a lot more freedom. Again, a big one was maybe the H1 chip in the headphones, or even the connectivity chips that we see in the AirTags. all that is enabled by Apple's ecosystem and Apple owning the entire stack from a hardware and software perspective. So being able to now have their own in-house Wi-Fi is going to be something that I think is going to be very beneficial for the user moving forward. Could be restrictive from a third-party standpoint and things like that, but at the end of the day, Apple's worried about their end user first and foremost. So now let's talk cameras, because we've all seen the iPhone 17 Air speculation about how it's going to have this kind of visor look or this rectangular look that goes across the entire device. Now the iPhone 17 Air is only expected to have one rear-facing camera, possibly two or some sort of telephoto sensor or something like that, but there's only been one in all the renders that we've seen, but it's going to take up the entire rear of the phone. And now it's not really like Apple to break away from a form factor, especially from a design language standpoint overall, so we can probably see this same exact rectangular visor that we have seen with the Pixel lineup for the past couple of years, and it could trickle over to the 17 Pro and the 17 Pro Max, which is something that, again, will take a little while to get used to, but overall I think it would be a net positive, especially for people who like to place their phones down and type on their phones at a desk, because if you guys use your iPhone that way, then you know that it wobbles like crazy right now because obviously it's off-center. So having a visor that goes across the entire back kind of helps that symmetry, will definitely alleviate that issue, but it'll definitely take a little while to get used to because we've been so accustomed to having the actual camera on the top left of the rear of the device, dating all the way back to the original iPhone. Of course, those cameras were way smaller, but that design language has stayed true for about 17 or 18 years now at this point. But on the 17 Pro and Pro Max, that could leave a little bit more room for a larger sensor, for maybe a periscope camera, for a 10x zoom, all things that I would definitely welcome from an iPhone. Another rumor we've been seeing is going to be the build material, which honestly I'm not a big fan of because I do like the titanium finishes of the 16 Pro and 16 Pro Max. So as of right now, there is an inkling that Apple might go back to aluminum from titanium. I'm not exactly sure why. Maybe from a heat dissipation standpoint, it works better with aluminum, because again, Apple Intelligence is generating a ton of heat when it comes to using it on your iPhone, so maybe that's what their main focus is when it comes to making this as usable as possible. But I like the titanium feel, I like how it's a little bit lighter than aluminum, so I don't know exactly what Apple's kind of end game is when it comes to build materials, or if it's maybe just cheaper to manufacture at that point. But in that same light from keeping it as cool as possible, Apple will be introducing in a brand new improved cooling with a vapor chamber. Again, this is all with Apple Intelligence in the future in mind. They want to make this as usable as possible and make it so it's as if you're using your phone normally without it kind of overheating or overworking. And I have noticed that with Apple Intelligence and the more AI features that we use, these phones get a little bit warm. The more it's searching, the more it's looking for things, the more it's working on device, it's still going through a lot of data at one time. And yes, it's an amazing thing to see, to get all this information pretty much at the palm of your hand, but if it's going to ruin your battery life, heat up your entire phone, and maybe even burn it out, you know, it's something that I really would rather not have. So the improved cooling with the additional RAM in these Pro models should help kind of alleviate all those issues. So that is what to expect with the 17 Pro and Pro Max specifically. We do have some other information that's kind of looming about the iPhone SE 4, which we'll talk about in a future video because I'm very excited about that one in particular as a low-cost option to get into the Apple ecosystem while still not feeling like you have a diminished iPhone anymore, because that form factor and design language should kind of meet up with what we have in 2025 from an iPhone standard. But that'll do for this video, everybody. Let me know in the comment down below what you think. Are you excited for all these new changes coming to the 17 Pro and Pro Max? Is it enough to warrant an upgrade from year to year? I personally don't think so. And as long as you have a USB-C iPhone, I definitely think it's worth holding off for a little bit more. And now we're getting to the point where maybe it only makes sense to update every 2 to 4 years, or maybe even 3 to 5 years, versus every other year even at that point. But that'll do it, everybody. If you made it to the end, leave a little dolphin in the comments down below so I know you made it to the end. And if you want to watch more videos like this one, definitely check out one of these videos right here. And until next time, I'm Fernando. Peace, everybody.